Well, hello there again. It's Wazoo, and today I kind of want to go into best decks for Rush Royale. As in my last video that I made for the best units in Rush Royale, I got just a couple of comments requesting for best decks per arena and overall once you hit League, which is 4,000 trophies or more. I kind of just set up a quick little PowerPoint, because what's a better way to show information than through a PowerPoint? You know, classic good old times of, you know, it's an ancient relic, but it's stayed with us through the decades. So I just thought it'd be the best way to do it. Also, I'm just not going to put in too much effort into my videos, as there's just no reason to, as I can get the same information across with a simple PowerPoint. But if this continues to actually be something worthwhile, then, you know, the more worthwhile, the more effort I put into it. But until then, here's a PowerPoint for the best decks per arena. And then after I do all of the arenas, I will then go into somewhat briefly about the best decks in League, so which is 4,000 trophies or more. For these decks that I show here, these are only it's just one deck per arena. I'm not going to go into all the deck combinations you can make per arena. It's too much time consuming. Plus, nobody's going to really like go in depth and be like, I have this and that. Plus, you can use my other video, which I will tag now in the upper right corner. And you can kind of go through and see what units I think are good, what units I think are bad, and what units are just hard carries in the end game and overall. But anyways, let's get into it. Once again, it's just my opinion from what I've noticed, and I hope this helps those who watch it. So first starting off, we got Arena 1. It's the most basic. You get 8 characters to choose from, 2 heroes, but in reality, it's just 1 hero for the most of the part. And essentially the best deck that you can come up with is Archer, Lightning Mage, Ice Mage, Reaper, and Priestess. And the reason why, because this deals actually the most DPS at this level, and it actually could carry you through Arena 1, Arena 2, and possibly Arena 3, and maybe even Arena 4. As the Priestess surprisingly does decent damage if you get like a level 4 or level 5. If you upgrade it on the mana, you can get some decent damage through that. Once again, the Archer, pretty good carry. Reaper, pretty good carry as well. The higher health, the better it becomes. And Ice Mage and Lightning Mage, just for good area control. Next, your deck completely changes once you get to Arena 2 and you actually unlock everything. So quick disclaimer here, I'm just going to be doing the best possible decks you can make. Obviously not everybody can make this stuff. Like, you're not going, as soon as you hit Arena 2, you're not going to be able to get your first legendary and guarantee yourself an engineer. But you can get close enough to it, and I'm hoping you can use this as like a structure to base your decks that you make around it. But once again, we're going to keep the Priestess, and that's the only card we keep from the previous deck. Everything else is pretty much every single card you get this arena, and purely because you are doing so much more DPS now with the Engineer, the Hunter, and the Rogue, all 3 doing massive amounts of DPS. And with Frost is basically a much better Ice Mage in my opinion. And once again, Trainer, because Trainer is just an overall reliable hero. It's pretty great for the most part. Nothing too special, just stops the enemies. So once we go on to Arena 3, we actually switch out the Rogue for the Bombardier. And the reason why is because the Bombardier stuns. It basically slows down the oncoming unit or the oncoming monsters even more with Frost, and it pretty much gives you a nearly unlimited time to kill whatever is coming at you. Now for this deck, as soon as Boreas becomes unlocked and you get Boreas, immediately start using Boreas. Boreas is a hard carry, massive amounts of DPS in the very early games, and even in some of the late game decks as well. And for this deck, we still keep the Bombardier, Frost, and the Priestess to get some more mana, as well as slow down the units to pretty much a crawl. However, we include the Mime, which also appears in this arena to help get rid of Priestess, so I can hopefully get more Boreases, Bombardiers, and Frosts. For this one's a mana-heavy production deck. It pretty much just replaces Priestess with Vampire, which doesn't do as much damage, but has a much overall higher mana production. Almost, I think from when I used it, it felt like 2 times as much. And I forgot to mention earlier, but Trickster is great for mana production, as it steals mana from your opponent. So your opponent gains less mana and you gain more. So might as well mention that now, because I think I stopped using Trickster after this one. But anyways, so Bombardier, Boreas, Frost, Mime, pretty much all the same. Vampire is just the only switch out because it just has a higher mana gain, a higher mana gain. So after this, the arenas, in Arena 6, you don't gain any like cards that you could really immediately throw in there and start using. You do gain the Demonologist, which is a pretty nice mana producer, as it produces massive amounts, but it's kind of the same function as the Priestess, except it spawns a minion on your opponent's board. And I overall presumed that Vampire would be better for mana production, plus you can use Mime on the Vampire more freely to possibly get one of the 3 in the front that I've stayed in this deck for so long. Bombardier, Boreas, and Frost. And also Elementalist is now available, and Elementalist is one of the most well-rounded heroes, I could say. It's essentially a better J by far, except it costs 800 morale instead of 500. J is the cheapest hero in the game, so if you have a low morale team, but usually most teams have around 15 to 20 morale, so you can afford an 800 morale hero cost. But these cards that you get in Arena 6 are more useful once you get towards Arena 12 and Arena 13, as that's when you start unlocking everything, and that's when these cards really start to shine, mainly the Executioner and the Demonologist. But I'll get to that later. Anyways, Arena 7 is when you unlock the Bruiser, which is arguably one of the most well-rounded cards in the game, as it can pretty much be used in any gimmicky deck to immediately make it well-rounded. Along with this, you get Hex, which hard carries during minion rounds later in the game. Thunderer and Crystalmancer are also great forms of multiple and single target damage. The reason why I say multiple for the Thunderer is because it targets 6 minions specifically, or it targets 1 to 7 minions specifically, I should say. And the number of minions it targets is based on its tier that's at. So like if it's at tier 2, it will hit 2 minions. If it's at tier 1, it will hit the minion that it's attacking initially twice. I'm pretty sure. But essentially, this deck that you see right here is almost an endgame deck. I actually like to use a different variation of this deck, but essentially this deck right here is a great well-rounded deck that could probably carry you all the way into League, and maybe even 1,000 trophies into League. And once again, Vampire for mana, Bombardier for stunning, and Bruiser, Hex, and Boreas for triggering Hex's ability, which insta-kills, and Bruiser just does area damage if need be, and high attack damage along with Boreas. Overall great deck, and this deck stays the same for most after Arena 8, because I switch out Vampire with Dryad, because Dryad just allows you to level up whatever you merge it with. So because of that versatility, it makes this deck this deck is pretty much the end game deck I like to use. I think it's very nice. It's fun to use, especially whenever you beat like some other high tier decks with it, because it definitely can contend with those upper tier decks. But anyways, this deck stays the same, I'm pretty sure. In Arena 9, you get a lot. You get one crucially important character, which is Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn is used along with Dryad and Scrapper, which we'll get to later, in almost every single endgame deck, which I'll show later. But between these two, the biggest gains were Dryad and Harley Quinn. Ivy, which is this the other purple star in the second row. It's like the only card in the second row. Ivy is actually pretty good for mid-range to early late game builds as well. Can deal high amounts of damage quite easily because it stacks its damage, and it ticks every like second or something like that. Anyways, or not every second, every like, it's a weird number they don't specifically say, but it ticks quite fast and does quite a lot of damage and can crit every single time it ticks. So anyways, moving on. At this point, you unlock two great DPS options. However, one of them is much easier to use, and that's being the Cultist. The Cultist is one of the best endgame cards to use. I think I put it at top. Actually, you know what? I'll get to that later. But Cultist is great for doing endgame damage. Same thing with the Inquisitor, which is the one with the golden wings on the helmet. The Inquisitor is also great for doing endgame damage, but the Inquisitor needs a more specific deck in order to really start pulling off the crazy amounts of damage it could. But at this point in the game, it could definitely be used with the cards and provide endgame results. We are at 2,600 trophies, so you are getting to that point where you're being introduced to most of the cards, but we still have 3 more arenas after this, and then we'll unlock all the cards, and that's when we have the full potential, as many of the great game-changing cards happen in the next 3 arenas. But point being, Inquisitor and Cultist are game-changing cards at this point. Many of the decks, if they have the choice to use Cultist or Inquisitor, they will be using them. Yeah, at this point I'm also using Snowflake. I switched to Snowflake at this point because Snowflake ends up being just more useful, as some of these decks later on take some time to really get going, and by this time you're more likely to have Snowflake as well. So that's why I included Snowflake now, because it makes more sense at this point. Because like before with the other ones, you could have gotten them relatively at that time, even for like some of the ones that you just unlock once you hit that area, you could relatively get it, you know, but it takes a second to really get some of the epics, and so by this point now is when you could start to get Snowflake. But if you don't have Snowflake, you could use the Elementalist. Elementalist is a great option, great hero overall. And but yeah, so moving on, this stays the same until we get to Arena 13. And the reason why is because in the past 2 arenas, Arena 11, we unlocked the Blade Dancer, and in Arena 12, we unlocked the Knight Statue. And once we get to Arena 13, that's when we unlock Scrapper. And once we unlock Scrapper, we actually immediately get access to the best deck in the game. This is not a surprise. The Blade Dancer, though it's only single target, has the highest single target damage in the game when combined with the Knight Statue. Its single target damage is so through the roof where sometimes you can even ignore Tribunal's effect 3rd, 4th boss into the match. And if you've ever played against Tribunal, you know Tribunal activates whether you like it or not. As long as it's been alive for like half a second, doesn't matter if it's stunned, frozen, what have you, it will trigger its ability to downgrade your characters, which is quite annoying, especially if you have a random 1 tier that you just physically couldn't upgrade or whatever. Anyways, point being, this deck deals such high single target DPS that it actually turns into area damage because it kills every single minion so fast. And because of that, it's the best deck that you get once you have access to all the cards, essentially. That's what Arena 13. Now, though I did just share with you what the best deck is, in my opinion, there's still tiers. There's still the second best, the third best, the fourth best, which I actually believe are all in contention with the best deck. And getting on with that, here are the top 10 best decks that I believe exist in the game currently. And to kind of give a quick little overview, decks 10 through 7 are kind of a back and forth. You could really switch them around however you'd like. Decks 6 and 5, once again, you could kind of order them however you like. I'll explain why I placed them where I placed them, but yeah, you'll see. And then decks 2 through 4, I ordered them in a specific way, but you honestly could interchange them as different scenarios will arise where one's better than the other, or one completely outpasses the other. But because of its consistency, it's just what I took into account when making this tier list for the top 10 best decks in the game once you hit League. You'll see. And then obviously, Blade Dancer, overall, I just found it to be the most consistent, which is why I placed it at 1. But here we begin. So, number 10, using the hero Zeus, which is much harder to obtain for many reasons, as it's only around every third week. It's around to be able to get, and I think if you really want to guarantee yourself to get it, you have to purchase money. Otherwise, you just have to hope that you get or you have to purchase the pass for like $10. But anyways, I'm just going to be kind of using all the heroes I had at disposal. I don't have the Necromancer, so I can't use that in any of these deck builds. But anyways, continuing. For number 10, we have the Thunderer along with Meteor, and then a bunch of units that help merge them and level their tiers up. And with this deck, the whole idea is that you essentially will use Meteor to combine to get a quick instant damage, while having Thunderer level up to like tier 5, tier 6, and get like 2 of them to 3 of them on the board, so that they're doing massive AoE, or multiple target damage, I should say. And hopefully that should carry you before your opponent ends up like beating you, obviously. And the reason why I rank this as number 10 is that the Thunderer, though it does quite good damage, it doesn't do great damage. And hoping and banking on the Meteor to carry for the lost damage isn't that great, since his constant damage is quite poor. And you can only use the Meteor effect or you can only use a Meteor effect every time you merge, which isn't as reliable. Again, so the lack of consistency with this deck is what places it at number 10. However, its potential to shine is extremely high, and it could carry you through the 3rd, 4th, and sometimes 5th boss quite easily. But yeah. On to number 9. Now, number 9 actually takes its inspiration from the number 1 deck, which is the Blade Dancer deck. But instead of using the Blade Dancer, it's using the Crystalmancer. And we replaced the Dryad with the Catapult, as the Catapult does massive amount. Like, I think each shot does 4 to 5k, and if that crits, it's an insta-kill on pretty much anything on the board. And the Knight statue is there to promote the attack rate of the Crystalmancer in order to make the Crystalmancer do even more damage, and the attack rate also benefits the the catapult, I believe. If not, I can't remember exactly. But if the Knight statue doesn't affect the catapult through attack speed, it definitely increases the crit rate, making each attack the catapult does much more worth it. And once again, we're using the Scrapper to help not mess with the way things are organized, and Portal Keeper to organize the things in the first place. Snowflake is there to help make sure that everything gets slowed down so it can either be hit by the catapult or get hit by the Crystalmancer and give the Crystalmancer more time to actually start dealing the massive amounts of damage it can do. But this is number 9, as it's just a much inferior version of the Blade Dancer. Now, number 8 also takes after the concept of the Blade Dancer, which is having one unit deal massive amounts of damage, which in this case is going to be the Engineer, as having like 10 to 12 to 13 Engineers, I should say, on the board can really start to greatly impact the amount of damage the Engineer does. And the reason why I made this deck as number 8, as in order for it to really shine and really hit that top 5, even top 3, it has to be level 15 and max tier, or like max talents, which is quite costly and very hard to obtain. But for now, I'm going to leave it at number 8, as it's a very well-rounded deck for the most part, and it takes on the concept of deal so much damage that you don't need area damage. And that whole idea. And the reason why it beats out the other decks is because it's usually much more easier to just merge them together and hope for an Engineer, and once you get an Engineer, just leave it. And you can also use Harley Quinn to combine the Engineers together to hope for more Engineers, as well as Summoner to get more Engineers. And it kind of just stacks all this. You just get a ton of Engineers on the board, and then the Trapper will slow and armor break, and the Bombardier will stun, giving your Engineer more time to deal damage. Now on to number 7. Now, this deck doesn't seem that good at first glance. However, if you've ever tried to play against it like I have, it definitely does the damage needed to really get it going. Snowflake is there to give you more time to deal that damage and let the Corsair place all of its bombs, because the banner is purely there to just make sure that the Corsair, along with Ivy, can shoot out as many pins for Ivy, which allows damage to stack greatly per target that I focus on. And Corsair's bombs, so that the bombs stack across the field, so that all it takes is just the units walking forward and they're gonzo. And the Executioner there is... And the Executioner existing on the field pretty much just reduces the overall health of all enemies on field by about 30%, so that the enemies only have, essentially, by having an Executioner on field, it basically makes it so that the enemies only have 70% of their original health, essentially. And the Summoner there is to make sure that you can get all the other characters more frequently. Yeah, it does a lot of area damage, but because it does so much area damage, it lacks in the single target damage. However, sometimes that area damage can clutch up during minion phases, when stuff like the Blade Dancer isn't actually able to keep up with all the minions, and then you win because you kill the minions better than the Blade Dancer does. Now, the next deck takes on the same idea as the previous one, where you win during the minion phases, not the boss phases, as this deck is great at killing minions, especially once it gets higher up, as it's just about fire rate and hitting the minions, not necessarily dealing damage, as via hitting the minions that triggers Hex's ability, which causes it to obviously insta-kill whatever it hits. This doesn't affect the mini bosses and the big bosses, but because you're killing all the mini minions, you don't actually have to worry about the big boss's health, as it's usually small enough that you can kill it in time. Also, this deck, along with the previous one, is very immune to Bedlam and Puppeteer, as it's pretty easy to rearrange everything, and the placement of Hex, as long as you have plenty of Boreases and Bruisers on the field, it doesn't really matter where Hex is. And then obviously we have Summoner and Dryad for easy level ups and more minions on the field. The next one. Now, this deck, I hate putting it at number 5 because I believe it to be one of the most scumbaggy decks you've ever seen, as it's literally just there to make it utterly atrocious to just play against. First of all, you have Shaman there to D-level your opponents, or D-rank your opponent's minions. Basically, if it's at tier 2, it goes to tier 1. If it's at tier 1, it disappears, which is annoying. And then you have Summoner to spawn more minions on your opponent's side. The hero, Mari, will destroy 5 minions, up to 5 minions on your side, randomly. It'll be the small common minions. Destroy 5 of those, and then we'll spawn a big unit on the other side that will also give you mana when it dies. It's basically a hero with the Demonologist built into it. And then the Harley Quinn and Summoner basically make it more often that you get the Shaman and the Demonologist, so you can combine those together as much as possible. And the Bruiser is there to simply hard carry for the damage. So you need a few Bruisers in order to actually win with this deck, because otherwise you're doing no damage. But it is fun to be playing this deck, but it is utterly atrocious to be versing it. So, but its versatility, its actual effectiveness is why I place it at number 5. Next, now these next 4, first of all use Zeus, because of Zeus's early game hard carry, as well as Zeus allows you to like pretty much set up your entire board, and you don't really have to worry about killing the minions, as one click with Zeus and everything's dead. If not, it insta-kills other things that are too big, or it clears most of your board. It's overall a pretty good board clear. But anyways, the Inquisitor deck, the reason why I ranked it number 4 is because out of all the endgame decks, which is what we're into now, like these are the endgame decks, the meta decks, out of all the meta decks, I find Inquisitor to be the most difficult to upkeep, as you need exactly 1, 4, 7, or 10 Inquisitors, along with an even number of Knight statues, in order to maximize its full potential. The more Inquisitors you have, the better. Usually once you hit 7 Inquisitors, that's when there's like that's just when you've pretty much won the game at that point. And if you have 7 Inquisitors that are all level 3 or tier 3 or above, you're golden, you're good to go. Nothing really to worry about anymore. And as long as you have like 3 of those level 3s next to a level 3 Knight Tower, you're good. Obviously there has to be 2 Knight Towers on there, I'm just saying. As long as you got 3 of them next to the 2 Knight Towers in total, you're fine. Bombardier there is there to stun, just to give your Executioner more time to, Inquisitor more time to actually build up its damage, because its damage scales the longer it hits, similar to the Crystal Mancer. And then obviously Scrapper there, and Scrapper there to level up stuff, and Portal Mage there to organize stuff. Number 3. So the reason why I placed Robot in front of Inquisitor, even though Robot is kind of a worse Inquisitor, if the Robot is much more consistent, as all you need to do is just merge it. It actually encourages you merging it and getting rid of it, and like merging it together. And because of that, it ironically makes it more reliable, because you just merge with this deck. You just merge stuff together and hope for the best, and usually luck is on your side. And you get at least 3 to 4 robots on the field, 5, 6 if you're lucky, and you start shredding through stuff because you finally get it to its max level and you're dealing tons of damage. And though The peak potential with this deck is less than Inquisitor, because Inquisitor has such of a threshold, or like such of a requirements that it needs to meet in order to actually be viable. It's less what's it called, consistent than the robot. Anyways, on to number 2. Now, number 2 is the Cultist deck, and the reason why is because the Cultist deck is pretty much this deck, along with the Blade Dancer, are the two most consistent high damage dealing decks in the entire game. And if you notice, their deck consistency pretty much consists of the same 3 cards. Just with the Cultist, you have Harley Quinn and the Cultist, and then with the Blade Dancer, it's the Blade Dancer and the Knight statue. But essentially, these 2 decks are dealing roughly, arguably, the same amount of DPS, with the Blade Dancer doing more single targets and the Cultist doing more area damage. And their crit rates also are close enough to each other, in the sense that the Cultist, if you play it right and play it in the specific way that you need to, I'll maybe go in depth on how to play these decks later if you guys ask me, but for now, it's pretty much these 2 decks are in tandem for like the best decks. If you're running one of these, you are climbing up the ladder extremely fast. I find the Cultist to be more reliable for climbing the ladder, but for peak potential, consistency, and overall DPS, the Blade Dancer will take number 1, and the Cultist will take number 2. Anyways, with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this little PowerPoint I had for you. I hope it was informational. I tried to make it shorter, as the last one was super long. But yeah, once again, I'll post that video to kind of go into more detail on each of the units, kind of in the end card. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great day. See you later.